Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Purple State of Mind podcast. My name is Siddharth,
I'm Ishan.
and today we're going to be evaluating the joint American-Israeli operation in Iran and across the entire Middle East. In this episode, we're going to be evaluating America's actions. We're going to be talking about the constitutionality of this military action. We're going to move into the geopolitical implications, and then we're also going to talk about what do we think is next from the kind of couple of context clues we've gone from the administration. So, I want to start off by asking you just what do you think about America's action or their involvement so far in this military operation, Operation Epic Fury?
It's actually pretty interesting because it was late Friday night here when we first got word that the U.S. was launching this. That's the beauty of being in California. You get things a little bit
When you're
before the
awake.
rest of the country. Yeah, exactly. And so at first, the idea that we were going to war was pretty simple. It was the fact that Iran has been killing protesters in the streets and the regime had to go. This is an oppressive regime that really has done nothing good for their country since the Islamic Revolution. And so when Trump put a red line on them in December and told them to stop killing protesters, and they didn't, it was pretty much expected that we were going to eventually do something. Now, reporting has shown that it was Benjamin Netanyahu who has been asking Trump to go to this war since December, is when he really started to launch this campaign with Trump. And the U.S. was ready to do it in January, but Netanyahu had asked for a little bit more time. This is all reporting from the New York Times. He had asked for a little bit more time for Israel to really ramp up and get ready. And so we finally saw this happen. And so, under that basis, we could see this coming for a long time. It was more so a matter of when rather than if. And so, I'm not surprised by it. But I think the biggest problem here has been just the pure incompetence from the Trump administration. They have not outlined any form of clear objective. They have been all over the place, contradicting each other. It's almost like they threw out Marco Rubio, they threw out Trump, they threw out Pete Hegseth, Steve Witkoff. Each one of them had a different story as to why we were going to war with Iran, and that's just dangerous. We'll dive into each one of their stories in a bit because it's worth noting and it's worth understanding. But just my basic belief on this is that there's no clear objective, there's no clear plan, and we've seen throughout history that U.S. foreign policy, when designed like this, is catastrophic to the rest of the world.
Yeah, building off on that, I think that the biggest concern is that we don't necessarily have an outlined plan from the Trump administration. We don't know exactly what the objective is. All signs indicate regime change, but what is, I guess, the method of that? Are we talking about boots on the ground? Are we talking about supporting local militias? Are we talking about arming these protesters? What exactly is the strategy here? And one of the things I want to touch upon, how you called the Islamic regime a oppressive entity, and that's, I think, objectively true. I think that it's important for us early on to kind of draw the line that being opposed to war or being opposed to this action does not indicate support for the Islamic regime. It indicates, I mean, for a lot of people, it indicates that they just don't want another American war. They don't want us to enter another country without much of a plan. So far, though, evaluating American actions, I think that, I mean, once again, we're seeing just an outright decapitation strike, just taking out top leadership to an extent that we've never seen before. I know Israel did this similar thing less than a year ago, but we're seeing really the structural integrity of the Islamic regime has definitely been shook, at least at the top. However, I mean, if you really are going for regime change, the only way that you're going to be able to accomplish that is you're going to need to take out more and more of the leadership and just leave a power vacuum, and hopefully the protesters or a local militia or whoever it is, whether it's the Kurds, whether it's the Balochistan rebels, like, you don't know if they don't really take the mantle, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen after that power vacuum opens up. So, talking specifically about American actions, I guess some reports are indicating that we've already lost around $2 billion worth of equipment. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, obviously, it's probably a lot. We've launched a ton of missiles, a ton of airstrikes. We have 3 confirmed down. I think they're F-15s, are they? And then additionally, we've lost 6 servicemen, servicewomen already. So obviously, it's going to be costly. But I think when it comes to the objective, if it's regime change, I think it's progressed as we'd expect. However, the problem is we don't know exactly to what extent we're talking about regime change. Are we talking about a full uproot, or are we talking about someone from the inside taking power again?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the 6 service members who died, because all of the equipment that you mentioned can be replaced. Mm-hmm. Their lives can never be replaced. And the problem is that you've dragged America into this war, and now service members are dead, and you still don't have a clear objective. And you've made pretty clear that more service members are going to die. This is not going to be it. And again, you don't have a clear plan. And I'm going to keep coming back to that, because when you go to war, you typically either A, address Congress, or B, you have a really solid plan as for what the end game is, what your long-term objective is, and the Trump administration has just not provided that. So I want to go into the 4 almost alternating perspectives that we've gotten from this administration. So the first one comes from Steve Witkoff, who on February 22nd, so this is 6 days before the invasion, said that Iran was enriching uranium at well beyond the threshold for civil use. He said it was probably a week away from having industrial-grade bomb-making material. I want to just, before I get your perspective on this, I want to make a note here. Last year, there was a 12-day war with Iran. Israel was included in that war. The U.S. was included in that war, in which Trump bombed and claimed to have taken apart their entire nuclear capacity. And so the fact that we are now coming to this conclusion from Steve Witkoff, who has also said that he was misled by Iranian leadership, it just shows pure incompetence on his part. And I want to hear what you have to say about Steve Witkoff's idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think the United Nations, of course, like, here's the thing. It's a lose-lose for the Trump administration if you actually break this down, because either, they truly were incompetent in negotiations and they were just naive to what's going on, which I highly doubt this is the case. But what's probably the more likely theory, or the more likely actual cause, the more realistic story is that, and it goes along with the United Nations watchdogs and what a lot of independent sources reported, is we didn't actually destroy their nuclear capabilities. I saw something that said that those facilities would be up and running in, I think it was 3 to 6 months, something like that. And again, I think it's kind of a combination. I mean, I think that it's either, I think that we really didn't destroy their nuclear capabilities. And on top of that, I doubt that they're actually enriching uranium to this level, because the United Nations watchdog is the one that's supposed to evaluate that. If we don't get evidence, we're not going to do another WMD story. We're not going to go forward and deal with another lie from the federal government that costs us lives and money.
For sure. And it's also worth noting that it was Trump who pulled out of the JCPOA, which was a nuclear agreement with Iran, making sure it was something that Obama had signed, making sure that they don't enrich the uranium to these levels. But anyway, moving on to Pete Hegseth, our favorite Secretary of War. He said that the justification for the offensive war was Iran's swelling arsenal of ballistic missiles and killer drones, which he said they were using to create a conventional shield for their nuclear blackmail ambitions. How fun.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. I don't believe the last part at all about the nuclear blackmail. I don't know what that means in the first place. But if they were going to talk about drones and say something about how they supply a ton of them to Russia or something, or talk about how they supply weapons to militias across the Middle East or terrorist groups across the Middle East, then maybe I can give them some credit. But and I understand that they did have these capabilities. They did have ballistic missiles. The Shahed drones are pretty fast. I forgot what they're called, but they have hypersonic missiles. That's very true. But is that truly the justification? It could be a part of it. However, nuclear blackmail, I don't know what that means. I don't think anybody knew what that means when they heard it. And again, if that's the case, we should be attacking a lot more nations for their ballistic missile capabilities and what they have with drones, because that's warfare nowadays. Everyone's just using missiles and using drones and cyber warfare and things like that. So I don't get that justification. And already, I like already how this completely contradicts what so the first guy said that's because they're enriching uranium. The second guy says it's because they're building things to protect that enriched uranium. So what's going to happen next? We'll see. Well, what's the next story?
Well, I'll get to that in a second, but I also want to bring up the fact that you have to, as the administration declaring war here, you need to prove that it's an imminent threat.
Absolutely.
And the problem is, this is nothing new. These ballistic missiles and the killer drones are nothing new. So what made it February 28th that made you have to go in and start bombing them? What was the imminent threat that wasn't there when, during Trump 1.0, during the entirety of Trump's first year? What changed? What changed? And the funny part is we're going to actually get to that with Mr. Marco Rubio here. Mr. Marco Rubio.
The Shah Supreme Leader plus President of Venezuela.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Marco Rubio, you know what? Let's just play the clip. Let's play the clip of Marco Rubio talking about this.
We stood and waited for that attack to come first. Before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
So to just quickly summarize that clip, it is in part saying that America was attacking Iran because Israel was going to attack Iran either way. So America had to go first and go with Israel to preemptively attack Iran so that they couldn't attack our bases first. In other words, Israel controls the foreign policy of the United States of America, which is just amazing. But I don't know, this might be one of the worst justifications for an administration that has already been tied to Israel as much as it has been. I don't even know how you justify this.
Yeah, I literally, I mean, honestly, I'm kind of disappointed because I thought that Rubio was a little bit more of a well-spoken individual when it comes to the big four. With Trump, Vance, Rubio, and I guess Hegseth. I guess you put him in there. But that was truly disappointing. I mean, I think, again, I'm not surprised. I think that's the most realistic justification, right? Or most realistic truth. Not really justification. I think that's the most truthful thing. But, again, so when we talk about it, and we're going to touch upon it a little bit more in the constitutionality section of this episode, the War Powers Act kind of outlines these three provisions that exist, or three justifications for the president to conduct such a big operation elsewhere. So I'll touch upon that in that section, but I can guarantee you, of those three, your ally conducting an attack is not one of the three. My question, and I think everyone's question, is how is Israel going to dictate what we are going to do? And it's a question we have on so many different levels. But why couldn't we just stop them from attacking? I really don't get that. I don't get, if you really don't have a plan, what is the goal here? Like, why would you let that happen? Especially letting them wait. Letting them wait so you can act with them is truly confusing. And there were reports the other night, which could be somewhat of a positive indicator for American troops. Maybe not for American troops, but something about Israeli forces operating inside Iran. I'm not sure how true that is. Again, we don't really get a lot of verified information about that. But at least that shows some of an indication that Israel would put its troops on the ground. However, as far as it goes on domestic soil, that is probably the worst justification for any conflict ever in this country's history. So,
Well, Marco, and this is kind of building off of your point, but Marco basically said that the U.S. had two options. Option number one was allow Iran to strike the U.S. without the U.S. having struck first. And that would have been in retaliation to what, according to Rubio, Israel was planning on doing regardless. So that was option number one, which is obviously not a good option, right? You don't want your bases to get struck, especially when you don't do anything first. And option number two was what the U.S. ended up doing, which was going in first, preemptively striking Iran with Israel. And then, obviously, you see what's happened since, and the cards have played out the way that they have. But those aren't the only two options here. Mind you, Bibi Netanyahu, I'm talking like one of them, Netanyahu asked Donald Trump for approval to launch this war in the first place. Donald Trump granted him that permission. Why are we acting as though Israel had to do this? Netanyahu has been asking for 30 years for America to join Israel and attack Iran. No president has actually stooped to that level to join him for a good reason. This man has been asking for it and begging for it. Even Bush didn't do it. Bush waged every single war in the Middle East that he possibly could,
and he did it for the love of the game, yeah.
Exactly, for the
like
love
Bush
of the game.
Bush did it for the love of the game, and he didn't.
And this is where he drew his hard line, and yet Donald Trump just instantly jumped in with Netanyahu. It's absurd to me. Even last year, the strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, Netanyahu asked him to do that. Netanyahu has been going with this lie for so many years that, they're 2 weeks away, they're 3 weeks away, they're so close to building a nuclear weapon. It's never happened. It has never happened. And I'm starting to believe that it never will happen. Because Netanyahu has been lying about this for so long. At the end of the day, he just wants Israel to have the entire Middle East at his mercy. That's his entire game plan here. And Trump is just helping him do it at this point.
Yeah, he testified about Iraq's WMDs. He has repeatedly stated that some of the nations around him are dedicated to his destruction. And I think, look, the complicated portion of this is that when it comes to the Middle East, there's so many more aspects to the conflict than just the American portion of it, obviously. Because, yes, there are cultural tensions, religious tensions. There's a lot of historical context to the conflicts that go on there. However, we can't keep falling for these lies because we don't really see much action out of these other states. Like, I understand, like at this stage, of course, I feel better with Hezbollah being weaker. I hope the Houthis are weakened. I hope that Hamas is weakened. But that's not because of Israel. That's just because those are terrorist groups. Like, they're not terrorist groups because of Israel. They're terrorist groups because of what they do. And it puts us in a hard spot. But again, like, how many times, and I hate to say it because I understand that there's a lot more involved, especially, the actual protests going on in Iran. And I understand the oppressive nature of Iranian proxies and the quote-unquote axis of resistance across the Middle East. However, once again, this is the third, fourth, maybe fifth time that American soldiers and American money is going to fight a war that, yes, it has some benefits for us, but the American people don't want. It's, again, our ally in the Middle East that wants it. It wasn't the American people. This isn't what the American people voted for. This guy, President Trump, ran on no new wars. He ran on no new wars. And I don't get it. What is the reason? What is the real reasoning for why he can really break from that stance? I understand that stance was populist or performative in the first place, but how can he make such a drastic break from that stance for a war that we don't have a goal in? We don't actually have a pathway. And it's a repeated mistake. I understand previously when he used to say things like, look, what happened to the 2016 version of him where he was like, we spent $1 trillion in the Middle East. Where did that all go? Because again, now we're spending more billions of dollars, we're spending more American lives, and we're going out there and we're fighting a war with no direction.
Even just to add on to the irony here, J.D. Vance wrote an op-ed, and I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, saying that Trump's best foreign policy was no new wars, that he wouldn't send your kids overseas to fight. And that's exactly what Trump has done here. And furthering the irony, J.D. Vance is the one who, according to the New York Times, pushed Donald Trump to do this. Donald Trump had originally thought, maybe I'll just do a smaller strike at the beginning of the year, so around now, and then closer to September or towards the end of the year, he'll really launch that full invasion for the regime change. But J.D. Vance said, no, do it all right now. J.D. Vance pushed for this war after writing an op-ed about how Trump's best policy is no new wars. It honestly is funny to me because Marco and J.D. Vance are the ones who are going to be vying for that 2028 bid, and yet both of them, if this continues down the path that it's going right now,
losing their base,
are going to be forever tied to this policy, to this incompetence, incoherent war that we've started with Iran. But I want to get into this last guy who I'm just going to give you, I'm going to let you guess who said this. Last justification. Save the best for last. The regime continued developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. Now, I'll let you guess in a second, but mind you, a Defense Intelligence Agency assessment from last year indicated that Tehran would not have intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the U.S. until 2035. Any guesses on who could possibly have just lied in justification of this?
The DJT.
DJT.
The
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, it's another head scratcher. At least get your stories right, guys. Like, this is like something we discuss in high school. If you're gonna lie to the teacher, then like get your story right. Like, stay consistent. This is honestly outrageous. I didn't think it would ever get to this level. Like, they can't even fix their own story themselves, and it once again kind of brings us back to that main point where, like, what is the objective here? What is the goal? And again, my main concern about this whole thing is, again, from an American sense, is the constitutionality, of course, and the implications that come financially and from a humanitarian aspect from what happens to our soldiers. And then even from just a human perspective, are we really in there to support the people of Iran? Are we really in there to support the democratic protesters? No, we're not, because they don't like the Ayatollah, but they also don't want a Israeli-American puppet just sitting in Tehran doing whatever the West wants. They don't want that either. They want self-determination. That's always going to be the case. And I understand that in our national interest, we wouldn't necessarily, again, like, I understand that we go out there and talk about, like, we're the bringers of freedom, we're the moral, blah, 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 all that stuff. First of all, we shouldn't even be the moral police, because that's not our job. And secondly, like Marco Rubio said at the Munich Security Conference, this isn't a perfect world. So, unfortunately, I think that he should take some of his own advice there and come out and if we all know that they're entering Iran to get themselves, first of all, to get Israel a true hegemony in the Middle East, and secondly, so that they can have a Western puppet in Iran, and make sure that it'll come at the expense of the Iranian people once again. Because yes, the Shah was secular and he allowed a little more freedom for women, or a lot more freedom for women, but at the same time, he was still oppressive. He was still a dictator at the end of the day. He was just more Westernized. They overthrew him for a reason. And let's not forget that the Shah coming into power was because the United States overthrew a popular president, Mohammad Mossadegh. They overthrew someone that was vastly popular. He was moderate. He was a little more non-aligned than most would see. And, of course, his Cold War policy, America has a lot of regrets from its Cold War policy. However, this is why we're back in this situation, and we can't get a repeat of that, because there's always going to be someone mad when there's a leader that's pandering to another crowd or pandering to another nation. Because you also have to think about what are we going to do financially to help them recover? Because if they're really recovering from a regime war, I understand lifting the sanctions will help them a lot. But, I guess we're going to have to start buying more of their oil. We're going to have to start giving them investments, things like that. That's more money that doesn't end up here, that doesn't stay in the United States. That's more money that goes elsewhere to another war in the Middle East to fund their infrastructure and fund, the rebuilding of their land. And I understand that technically we have a moral obligation to do so because we're the ones that caused that situation. The solution to that is just not cause the situation in general. When you do so, do it in a righteous way with a righteous goal. We're just doing it for our geopolitical interest. And that's concerning because we have so much to fix back home. I don't think, again, nobody on the political spectrum actually wants this apart from war hawks. Or I understand there is an Iranian diaspora that does want American intervention because they want the Shah to fall, or the Ayatollah to fall and the Islamic Republic to fall. However, really have to think about what do the American people actually want and what is best for American money and American troops.
Yeah, and to quote Colin Powell, you break it, you own it.
Yep.
And so, I don't know. It's honestly very interesting because I know what you're saying about this whole moral police on a global stage. And honestly, if the administration had come out outright and said, we are doing this for two reasons. Number one, because they are unwilling to negotiate on any form of nuclear agreement. And number two, because this is an oppressive regime that needs to go because they are killing protesters. We set a hard line. They refused. They are just not cooperating with us whatsoever. That would have been at least a justification. Mm-hmm. It would have been so much better and so much clearer than what we are seeing right now. And Absolutely. It likely would have had more support. Right now, this is about a 60-40 issue. 60 being against the war, 40 being in favor. Congress is pretty much split down party lines. It's so much different than 2004 Iraq when pretty much the entire country was for it, especially because of 9/11. Congress was for it, and yet it still saw massive deterioration over the course of the war. This one is starting out pretty poorly for Trump in the polls, and you got to wonder at what point does he consider the fact that this is absolutely going to kill him in the midterms? And then when he comes to that realization, does he just pull out of Iran and leave a country that he is quite possibly starting a civil war in to just war with itself? Does he still send aid? Does he send troops? What is going to happen when Trump inevitably abandons this war? Because it's not popular for him here domestically. And that's the bigger problem, is just because he hasn't laid out a clear objective. If you have laid out a clear objective, perhaps the American people would give you some leeway. Perhaps I would have given him some leeway. But A, you never addressed Congress. B, you never addressed the American people. You recorded an 8-minute video at Mar-a-Lago. By the way, just not even able to go to the White House and record these videos, not even able to go to the Situation Room. There's a picture with J.D. Vance in the Situation Room, not Donald Trump. Insane. But yeah, it just feels really awful to be in this position once again for America. This is not where we want to be going into the midterms if you're Republicans. And for Democrats, this is just beautiful. You run on this. You run on an anti-war platform, and you take back the Senate. You take back the House. Like, it's that simple.
Yeah. However, I mean, again, I really don't think if Democrats were in office, they'd pull out because, at the end of the day, depending on the party, this always is going to happen when there's a party in power. It's just the majority is going to start doing their thing. The minority is going to forget about all their mistakes. The majority is just going to do the same thing over and over again. And then the minority is going to come out and say it's bad. And especially when it comes to something like war, with how much the military-industrial complex contributes to politicians' bank accounts, like, I don't expect it to stop necessarily. So before we kind of move into this constitutionality topic, I wanted to ask you, what do you think would happen, or what do you think would change if, let's say, the Trump administration, even though, again, we don't know what the grounds for victory are, if they were to achieve a quick tactical or strategic victory before the midterms, what do you think? I mean, I think that I don't necessarily think it would make them very popular, but I think because I think people are just outraged that there's a war in general. But I think that, I mean, it would at least mend some of the damage done. What are your thoughts? What do you think could change in the midterms if this really did happen?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. No offense, I'm not a big fan of the premise of the question, just because when you look at something like Libya or Syria, you're able to do a quick strike there and destabilize their entire country by taking out the man, right? Because those countries were built around the man, whereas Iran is built around an idea, a religion. They're not.
They're theocratic.
They're theocratic. They're not the Sunnis who would just pick a new leader, right? They are purely based on religion at this point. And their entire thought process is that it has to be somebody who, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but who is a descendant of Muhammad.
It's Ali. I think Ali. I think
Ali.
Ali. It's one of his descendants. Yeah.
Exactly. So remember, Syria was built around Assad and Libya was built around Gaddafi, right? Iran has the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, but they have an entire government surrounding him. And so when you see something like, I don't know, perhaps bombing them and killing him, the Assembly of Experts will simply just appoint a new Ayatollah. And they're in that process right now.
Yeah.
He becomes a martyr.
martyr.
Exactly. That's also why he didn't want to escape, because he knew he could have been living sweet in Russia right now. But he didn't. He wanted to become a martyr and allow Iran to continue down this path. And so I also want to touch upon the IRGC here, because they're not just a normal military. They are designed purely to back the regime and to back their insane quests globally.
When we talk about authoritarian regimes, the IRGC is one of the most dangerous fighting forces because,
Exactly.
especially at a time of war, we should have evaluated that they're the ones really calling the shots. The Ayatollah is an 86-year-old man. He reportedly had cancer. You know, you're not really I guess it's an ideological decapitation strike. And I understand. I mean that's what they think, but that's not really the case. And I understand. Yes, they took out the defense minister. They took out the highest-ranking military officer, things like that. However, the way that country is set up is to where there's just a guy ready to take the spot next. There's a guy just waiting in line to get the spot, and it's difficult because I understand, I guess, why there's so many airstrikes, because I guess they're trying to eliminate some of this leadership without having to put boots on the ground. But you can only get so far with that. So I like that you brought up the, I guess, religious aspect of it, or kind of like how he's more of an ideological leader. But where I'd slightly push back is that while that is the case, Syria, their protests, or their Arab Spring-esque their stuff going on with that, the protesters weren't necessarily as united, because it was mainly a coalition of different tribal groups that were trying to get their own representation. And also the religious aspect of it was, and it kind of carried over into Iraq. I don't know the exact split, but it was kind of one sect, either Sunni or Shia, was standing up to what they viewed as an oppressive Sunni or Shia government. And when we talk about Libya as well, the Libyan protesters weren't even united in their own sense. We saw that in the aftermath of Gaddafi falling, the reason why they even broke out to a civil war. Because both of those leaders, Assad and Gaddafi, they realized that the protesters still had such a strong sense of religion. While the state wasn't necessarily built on religious ideology, the protesters had a lot of strong religious beliefs. That's why when Assad specifically, when he released a bunch of jihadists, he opened up the prisons, it made it a little bit harder for Western nations to kind of back these protesters, because they're supporting terrorists in some sense. Like right now, what we see in Syria, there's a former Al-Qaeda leader who's in charge of the country. And that doesn't exist in Iran, because yes, the IRGC is a very powerful force. they're so powerful in their own institution or in their own system that there's not really the existence of these fringe militias and paramilitary organizations. The protesters are genuinely civilians who feel wronged, rather than militiamen that want to get more power for themselves. So I don't know. I think that's just something that I should throw out there, that there's like a little bit of a difference between each conflict. But I do understand that there really is an ideological perspective, and it's a lot more complicated than a basic, take out the leader and you win.
Sure.
Like Maduro.
And I think where I would kind of argue back against that is just the fact that with both Syria and Libya, you saw their militaries at a point also crumble. The difference is the IRGC is just so much stronger than both of their militaries. Mm-hmm. And they are so much more baked into this religious ideology that is designed specifically for them to back the state and to back this ideology that it goes all the way up to the supreme leader. Remember, he had a very, very strong relationship, and so does his son, who is expected to become the new Ayatollah. They have a very strong relationship with the IRGC. And remember, the IRGC is also calling pretty much all the shots when it comes, and you mentioned this, all the shots when it comes to the military and the economy as well. And so I guess my point here is just that if you want some form of revolution and a complete overthrow of the regime, there's going to need to be some way in which you, A, get the IRGC to collapse entirely, and that can only be done if you actually put boots on the ground, which you obviously don't want to do. B, the only other way is if they turn on the government, which is just so unlikely to happen. And I think one of the biggest problems and mistakes that the U.S. has made in foreign policy, especially when it comes to the Middle East, is believing that just because you see these mass numbers of protesters out in the streets, that means that the entire country is behind you. Remember, Iran is a country of 92 million people. It's not a small country. If you were to put California, Texas, and Florida together, it's around that size. So the second that you buy into this belief that the people, every single one of them in Iran, is going to stand up and try and overthrow this regime, especially with the lack of military power that they have against the IRGC, which I believe is 100,000 armed, trained soldiers deep, you fall into this trap, and it's a very dangerous trap, if you ask me.
Yeah. Speaking of troops on the ground, I think that we should move kind of towards the constitutionality discussion. So this will probably be a little bit of a shorter segment because, again, there's only I think there's really I think we share the same interpretation of the law here, where they talk about two things. I think we share the interpretation of the law here, and the second thing is I don't think the administration cares about constitutionality. Ever since the War Powers Act really came into, matter of fact, ever since 9/11, I guess War Powers has been kind of just vested in the president.
If I can interrupt you real quick, no president since its adoption has really recognized the constitutionality of the War Powers resolution. It's relatively obsolete.
So just for discussion's sake, the War Powers Act, the 1973 War Powers Act, which outlined, I guess, three main provisions that would allow the president to have the authority to introduce American armed forces into hostilities globally. The three are a formal declaration of war passed by Congress, a specific statutory authorization, so special authorization from Congress for a specific operation, and then the third is a national emergency created by an attack upon the United States, any of its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. Israel wanting to launch an attack that's not one of those three. That's not any of the three provisions. Also, the opponent, again, I understand that there is a little bit of nuance here because you kind of have to, I get it. You don't want to be attacked first. You don't want to be attacked first and then have to wait for legal justification to respond. However, at the end of the day, that's still the law, and I think the executive is supposed to abide by that. And while I think it would be kind of redundant now, because at this point, I think we're at a stage where we just want to win. We want to win quick, and hope that we succeed and we don't make another Iraq or make another Syria or make another Afghanistan or make another Libya. That's a long list. We don't want to create another one of those. That's all we can really hope. As soon as that is over, I expect Congress, I really want Congress to go out there and do something about this, because this is getting ridiculous. The Constitution, I've said this before, I like to think of myself as a constitutionalist. I am a conservative. And the two things that worry me the most about this from an American perspective, I mean, of course, apart from lies lost in economics, is blatantly unconstitutional. And the second thing is, and I think, I mean, by definition, liberals don't like this either, but the executive branch, the federal government, can't have such broad power. It's worrisome that the executive is able to just circumvent some of these constitutional processes in order to impose his own will for his own foreign policy goals. It's very worrisome, especially, and it's brought me to the point where I'm able to say that Republicans aren't conservative and Democrats aren't liberal by definition. We have a new modern interpretation of what that means, because this is the so-called conservative government we have right now is probably the biggest government we've had in a very long time. And it begs the question. I mean, in the past, when I've come out and criticized Donald Trump or when I've criticized the Republican Party, of course, there's people in the comments that are going to be like, how are you going to call yourself a conservative? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? At the end of the day, the reason that most of the time I'd criticize Donald Trump is because he's expanding his power past what's legally vested in him, or he's expanding his power to infringe on some of the civil rights of American citizens or civil liberties. And as other people, as anybody that calls himself a conservative, how are you going to say that you're okay with that? Because that goes against conservative principles of wanting a small government. Originally, the belief was that the government should only be there, or the main goals or objectives of the government are national defense, infrastructure, and education to an extent, and I guess just enforcing the law. And again, as someone that says he's conservative, and I also think I'm a constitutionalist, those are my two biggest worries. And right now we are in wartime, I guess, and I understand that. I understand that it would be redundant to just vote repeatedly on stopping a war that's already begun. As soon as that's over, we need to make sure that nothing like this can happen again. Or if it does, there has to be proper legal justification or approval from Congress. Both.
Yeah. I want to roll a clip here of Senator Mark Wayne Mullen talking about this war. And the reason that I'm rolling this clip is that he has been very adamant that this is not war, because obviously war needs to be declared by Congress. So here is just his justification, whatever you want to call it. Let's roll the clip.
Are there measures being taken not to eliminate other possible alternatives to leadership?
This is war, and we're taking out the threat. And if you're part of the threat, then you're a target.
You'll concede this is war.
We haven't declared war. They declared war on us, but we haven't.
War. Secretary Hicks said
we haven't declared.
Just now, you said this is war.
They've called it war.
They've called it war. What I was saying. Okay, well, that was a misspoke. What I was saying that they've declared war on us, but war is ugly. It always has been ugly. But we're taking out a regime that's been trying to attack us for quite some time.
But you're not conceding this is war.
We have declared war. So if we haven't declared war, then I don't see that. The president hasn't asked us to declare war yet.
So the reason that I pull up that clip specifically is because congressional Republicans have been interesting, to say the least, in their justification for this. Because, to declare war, that needs to be done through Congress. But there was no form of address to Congress in this sense. Donald Trump had the opportunity. The very same week that we launched this war, he delivered the State of the Union, in which he spent, 3 minutes talking about Iran? So he never tried. He never tried to persuade the American people. He never tried to win over Congress. And Republicans are going to back him right now because, they kind of have to. We saw Dan Crenshaw lose in Texas because he wasn't on the full Trump train the way that Trump might have wanted him to be. And so, I don't know. It's just interesting. I will also say, though, in fairness to Republicans and fairness to the president, the executive branch does not really care anymore about Congress's ability to declare war. The executive branch, when it comes to military action, does whatever they want, and it's been that way for decades. That this is nothing new in that sense, but the fact of the matter is, Americans do not support this war. Congress overall right now does, but it's not a legal war that he's launched thus far. And I want to go back to your point about the three qualifications, and one of them, which is probably the most realistic that you can argue here, is an imminent threat. And I want to go back then to what we were discussing originally. There has been no justification to prove that this is an imminent threat. There have been 4 different types of theories floated out by the administration. None of them hold true. Each one contradicts the last. Mm-hmm. It's insane. The administration is grasping at straws to defend this. At the end of the day, this is a war of choice. They want to do this, and they are doing it because they can. It's that simple.
Yeah, to kind of wrap up the constitutionality topic, I just wanted to quote Gregory Meeks. He served in Congress for almost 30 years now. He served New York for a while as well. And he said it, he quoted Benjamin Franklin, "When you fail to plan, you plan to fail." That's just the perfect way to describe this. And again, I hope they have a plan and they're just not telling us. I guess this is their little freaking, I don't know, hide and seek peekaboo game where they just don't want to tell us until it actually happens. But Greg Meeks put it perfectly. I mean, the War Powers Resolution is simple. We're not, Congress wouldn't be voting on authorization for use of military force, especially at this stage. It simply asks that the president comes to Congress, as the Constitution has demanded since it was written, to seek authorization for what he himself and what the Secretary of Defense has described, and what it was who's the other guy that called it war? They have literally described it as war. So they have to do what the Constitution demands: go to Congress and explain, and get their vote. And it's not there to. It's not there to prevent the United States from defending itself. That's not the reason for the War Powers Act. The idea here was it's so that the president can't enter us into wars that the American people don't vote on, and that's what we're dealing with right now. And again, Greg Meeks kind of says it here, is that he was there to vote for 9/11. He served in the New York State Legislature before he had to vote. Then he went to Congress and he voted yes to go to war in Afghanistan after 9/11. He was here for Iraq. And at this stage, it's people like Greg Meeks who are in Congress that say that, you know, they've had to live through the horror of voting yes on 2+ wars that weren't, I mean, again, Afghanistan was justified. Iraq wasn't. They have to live through 2 grueling wars that resulted in thousands of American deaths. And both countries, I mean, Afghanistan, the Taliban is still in power. They're back in power. And in Iraq, they're still left in an unstable situation, and they don't really even like the United States. So, you know, it's people like them that you kind of have to listen to and be like, what was the idea here? And we need justification, because we can't make, like you said, I mean, again, we were talking about John Kennedy before this. I think his quote kind of applies to the American government in general. We don't get things wrong once or twice. We get it wrong 5 or 6 times just to make sure that, you know, we're apparently getting it right or we're getting it wrong, whatever. And it's another head scratcher. It's worrisome, and something I think it should be a pressing issues in the midterm. One of the pressing issues in the midterms for voters.
Well, it absolutely will be if we're at war. But anyway, I want to move into the broader geopolitical aspect of this. So it's a long list, but these are all of the countries that have thus far been dragged into this war. Most of them because Iran has decided that it wants to blindly just shoot. I don't know if you ever saw that Shane Gillis stand up about
I probably have.
About how they just blindly just start shooting, and when something hits. Anyway,
yeah.
These are the countries: Iran, the U.S., Israel, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Cyprus, the UK, France, and Germany. I might as well just list the whole world. Anyway,
Yeah.
This has become a regional war with U.S. allies' bases being struck. Turkey, I don't know, sorry, I didn't even mention Turkey. Turkey's been involved in this now. This
morning, yeah, the ballistic.
This morning, actually, it was that NATO had to shoot down ballistic missiles from Iran being sent to Turkey. So if you ever wanted to know if perhaps Article 5 could be invoked, now I know Pete Hegseth said, no, that's not a possibility right now, but let's say we continue down this path, who knows, maybe for the second time ever, Article 5 could be invoked. And this is really just turning into a really awful regional war. And so the two aspects geopolitically that I want to talk about here are, number one, this regional war and what could possibly end it. And number two, the CIA has decided that they want to start funding and helping the Kurds in Iraq launch this ground invasion. And also because Donald Trump has called members of the leadership of the Kurds to tell them, hey, we want you to do this and we want you to go take control, or really
We won't betray you for the third time.
We won't betray you for the third time. Trust us, this is going to be it. You're going to finally get your land. This is going to be amazing for everybody. You know, in a couple of months he abandons them. Anyway, the CIA is basically helping the Kurds launch this ground invasion. And it makes you wonder if the U.S. is going to inevitably put troops on the ground. But I want to get your perspective on this. Let's start with the Kurds, because I think that's the bigger civil war implications, broader point right now, and then we can get into the other countries that are being involved.
Yeah, so, I mean, based on history, if there's a militia, I guess, or an organized group you're going to send money and maybe weapons to back your military goals, the Kurds are probably at the top of that list. The Peshmerga, if you really look at it, even without American support at first, ISIS in Iraq was they overstepped. They pulled a little bit of a Hitler in Stalingrad, and they bit more than they could chew and tried to attack the Kurds. And the Peshmerga just decimated them because they're very well organized. I'm sure they're weakened after the Turkish invasions. The problem there, so from a logistical standpoint, or maybe not logistical, but from a technical standpoint, when you're talking about military strategy, the Kurds aren't necessarily bad. They're not really a ragtag militia. However, you also have to talk about, if you're going for regime change here, either way, I don't think a protester-led government would want the Kurds to be independent regardless. I don't think that they'd want that land lost necessarily. And also, I don't think it's realistic, because again, there are going to be, like, while it's not as tribal as Mesopotamia, I guess, Iran still has an ethnic identity, and you don't know if these people are going to be, I don't think people in Tehran, regardless of their allegiance, would be elated to see a bunch of Kurdish fighters in their city fighting in the streets. And same thing goes for the Balochis. Balochs. I don't think we're going to end up arming them because of some of their other interests. But just like them, there are some ethnic identities that it's kind of complicated. From a militaristic standpoint, it is beneficial because that's troops on the ground already. And we're already seeing a couple, again, I don't know if it's verified, I've already mentioned it, that we're seeing Mossad aiding Israeli special forces on the ground, which at least shows that they're willing to send a couple of troops at least. But the overall implication, is this going to play into, because Turkey hates the Kurds. They hate them. And how is it going to play into your relationship with Turkey? How is it going to play into your relationship with Iraq, where the Kurds are fighting for autonomy? How is it going to play into it in Syria? So there's so many different aspects, and that's why I think that, before you form a hardline opinion on this whole conflict, it's important to understand the many perspectives. And the only people that really know enough are going to be Middle East scholars, because there's so many historical aspects to this. And the geopolitical consequences. So we'll start. We'll keep on the Kurds for a little bit, or kind of the militias in the area. Who exactly is willing to align with the United States? I find it funny if it's true that the Kurds would actually believe us for the third time.
Yeah.
And we'll see. I mean, they can definitely do some damage up north, northern Iran. However, making it to Tehran, I think that's going to be the job of American special forces and American troops.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because in that 8-minute pre-recorded Mar-a-Lago address that Trump gave, when he announced this war, in essence, he said to the people of Iran who had been protesting, hey, look, now's your chance. Go take over your government. Two things to note here. Number one, the people of Iran are currently in a blackout. They have no access to the internet. This regime has made sure of that. So I don't exactly know who he's trying to address here. Number two, you are asking a group of unarmed civilians to rise up against a well-trained militia plus a well-trained controls the entire country regime in the IRGC. And so you're not actually going to achieve regime change unless you put troops on the ground. And so when you put the Kurds, when you try and help the Kurds go accomplish this goal for you, I think you're going to realize eventually that A, you've betrayed them so many times, I don't think unless you actually guarantee them something that they're going to do this. And let's be very clear here. The Kurds deserve their own autonomous land. 100% deserve it. But you have to really weigh here whether or not you're going to be able to carry out on any promises that you make them. And number two, the last thing that America should do, and Trump hasn't actually ruled this out, which does scare me, but the last thing America should be doing is putting troops on the ground to accomplish this full regime change.
It'll take years.
Huh?
It'll take years.
It would take years, exactly. And it would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, maybe thousands. Either way, it would cost a bunch of Americans their lives, and that's a problem. Look, I want to make this abundantly clear. I support regime change to an extent. I support this regime being completely wiped off the map. I actually don't believe that any form of governance should be anything but secular. And the fact that Iran makes me not want them to have their own government set up the way it is, but that's besides the point. My problem here is more so the fact that there's no real path to victory here. There's no path to what you're accomplishing. And even if you do end up getting rid of this regime, even if the Kurds are able to come in and wipe them out, you have no guarantee that what follows is going to be any better for the people of Iran. That's the big problem. They overthrew the Shah. I am telling you, I am positive about this. There is just so much instability in the Middle East from especially governments that rule the way that Iran is being ruled, to the point where I just don't see a logical solution past this.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I'm trying to find anything about kind of Kurdish separatism. So, again, there's an interesting aspect, because let's say that Reza Pahlavi actually, or is it Reza Pahlavi? Yeah, it is Reza Pahlavi. If he does become some sort of leader within this new, I guess, Iranian republic, the Kurds and Reza Pahlavi's grandfather did not get along at all. At all. And it was that's kind of like when the conflict originated, was when his grandfather became the Shah. Yeah, so like before, when his grandfather founded the Pahlavi dynasty. And in its current state, the insurgency is a little bit like, it's a lot more focused in Iraq and Syria. In Syria, they have the Rojava, I don't know how to say it, the Rojava. And then in Iraq, they had the Peshmerga, or the PKK. However, there has been a slight uptick in Kurdish attacks since like 2025. And they have just created, I'm just reading this, they have just, the major Iranian Kurdish parties have established the coalition of political forces of Iranian Kurdistan. And the goal is to bring down their stated goal is to bring down the Islamic Republic and release the Kurdish people's right to self-determination. The Kurdish people's right to self-determination. So again, we get a goal from them, and at the end of the day, while in the sense that we betrayed the Kurds, they are still pro-America, because the reason they were even able to fight back in the first place and the reason they weren't wiped out in the first place was because of the United States. So it's a tragic story. Turkey obviously does not have the best record, but it is a tragic story. However, the Kurds are what I would get behind is less than a regular militia that just wants soft power. These are actual people looking for their own autonomy, and they have for more than a century now. 100%. And they are pro-America. They don't hold a radical ideology like, let's say, I don't know, what's the group that did the Benghazi attack? Tahrir, I think it's Tahrir al-Sham. They used to be an American proxy. It's not like them, or it's not like the Taliban or the Mujahideen, which was anti-West from the start. So, again, there's a little bit of a difference there, but it's just putting troops on the ground just sounds so crazy to me still, because I just couldn't get behind that in any sense.
Well, I also want to bring this up. U.S. intelligence assessments have consistently indicated that the Iranian Kurds don't have the influence or resources to bolster a successful uprising against the government. Now, obviously, you add in the Kurds of Iraq, and you might have a different story there. But
also, I mean, you also have to factor in how like half of Iran's leadership is dead as well.
True, but I think I'm sure that intelligence assessments would go in under the understanding that the U.S. takes out a good portion of that leadership. But I think the broader problem here is what Trump is doing is he is encouraging a civil war by bringing the Kurds into this. And
Well, I just want to add that I don't think it's necessarily that the Trump administration is bringing them in, because Iraqi Kurds were attacked by Iran unprovoked necessarily. They launched a ballistic missile at Erbil, which is the capital of the Kurdistan region in Iraq, which has definitely ignited. There's always been tension there, which has definitely ignited the Kurdish resistance. However,
Yes.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying, though, is the fact that the CIA is arming them, and Trump has called leaders of the Kurds in Iraq to tell them that this is your opportunity. I'm going to help you in every way, I guess, except at this point military intervention. But, obviously that can change, and he's open to that possibility. But my point is that I believe, at least, that Iran launching at them is in retaliation to the fact that Trump has and the CIA have been trying to help the Kurds launch this ground invasion. But either way, the problem is that you are encouraging, and whether or not this is the Trump administration's workings, this is going to lead to a very high likelihood of a civil war. And the problem is there is no real end to that civil war. And what you end up seeing then is mass loss of life on both sides. And who knows if that leads to something that's favorable for America? Who knows if that leads to something that's favorable for the people of Iran or the Kurds? Nobody actually knows what would happen in a civil war. And so I view this as very reckless policy by people who really don't understand what they're doing and the implications of what they're doing, which is ironic because, as you mentioned earlier, Trump ran in 2016 on basically saying the war in Iraq was awful, which he was right about, by the way. But yet, for some reason, now he's doing the exact same thing, making the same mistakes, believing that his actions have no consequences, and it's going to lead to instability. It's going to lead to just a complete overhaul of what we currently see. It's illogical to me. But anyway, I want to move now to the other point that I was making earlier about all the other countries that have been involved. So I ran down that list. What are your initial thoughts on how the rest of the world could be getting involved in this, and whether or not this could turn into a regional war pretty soon?
Yeah, well, at its current stage, I haven't seen any indication of repeated strikes against those nations still. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I don't necessarily see them getting involved to a further extent. I think Qatar, was it, said that they were launching strikes, retaliatory strikes. I'm not sure which country it was. If Saudi Arabia got involved, now we do have a regional war because that's a heavyweight nation in the region. And we're kind of seeing the implications for a lot of other nations because the Iranian frigate, which was sank by a submarine this morning, or last night was it, had departed from an Indian port. And it was there for a defense exercise. Again, India does these defense exercises with everybody. And it's kind of, I mean, it's stirring up a lot there. And we're seeing the effect on our diplomatic missions in some other nations, like how the Marines had to open fire on some rioters in Karachi, Pakistan. And even in other nations, there's kind of organized protests against it. What's funny enough is I see more protests against this war or in support of the Ayatollah coming from the United Kingdom and France than I do from Iran. But, of course, I mean, not as many cameras in Iran in this stage. But, I mean, we kind of have to think about a lot of the different aspects. What does this make us look like? Because a lot of the relations that we had, a lot of the relationships we had, once again are put under strain because of war that we're fighting for Israel. Or not for Israel, but looks like it. Our justification given has had to do with Israel wanting this. I don't know why I say it like that, Israel. It's just Israel. Okay, Israel. Yeah, I mean, and as far as the other nations go, I really feel for the people there because they struck population centers. I saw downtown Dubai got hit.
The airport.
I know people in Qatar. I know people in Bahrain. I know people in Dubai. And they're all saying the same thing. It's scary. I mean, you don't expect to see missile blasts hit in the middle of, some of the most luxurious cities in the world. And it begs the question, was the idea from Iran to, I mean, while it does sound really stupid, I mean, when you get attacked by Israel and the United States, so you decide to bomb everybody else, apart from those two countries, I guess the idea there was to see if you can drag in other nations to where they could begin to pressure the United States and be like, bro, you need to stop this. We can't deal with this. We don't want them to attack us more. Or to have these nations kind of come out, and I don't know if that was a real statement from the foreign ministry of Saudi Arabia. Again, Twitter is obviously not the most reliable source of information, but there was, again, a report circulating that a Saudi Arabian foreign official said that the United States had abandoned them, blah, blah, blah. So maybe that was kind of the propaganda goal of the Iranian regime, of the IRGC, to have these nations kind of put forward the idea that the United States betrayed them in the name of Israel and are now leaving them subject to attack.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, just going to your point about knowing people, it's ironic how Marco Rubio in the State Department told Americans to get out of these areas, yet there's no way to get out because all flights are grounded. So just, a lack of planning, perhaps, and willingness for Americans to lose their lives overseas. I don't know. But anyway, going to what you're saying, though, I can see that being a part of it. We all know that Iran is going to put out propaganda to try and gain sympathy across the world. And honestly, though, to me, it's just been... I don't actually really know what to make of Iran's plan. I don't even know if they have a plan. It seems as though they haven't really thought this out fully. Especially...
Makes me think it was...
We were talking about it earlier. Hold on, let me just finish this point real quick.
My bad.
We were talking about it earlier, how their entire leadership is bombed and killed, and their first thought is to bring 88 of the people who are going to choose the next leader into the exact same room.
Yeah, above the ground.
above ground. It's just not
You
very
could have
smart.
met on Zoom. You could have met on Discord. Like, you could have met in a podcast setting. Like, you could have done anything apart from meet in person. And another thing is, like, just it's such a head scratcher what the military strategy is. It'll probably go down as some of the worst military strategy ever. And, like, again, Iran has come out and I guess said that they were caught off guard by this strike. And I understand that if there were negotiations, blah blah blah. Regardless, we have an aircraft. We have announced that we have an aircraft carrier like 20 miles outside of your port.
The largest military buildup since
Yeah. Iraq, wasn't it? Or yeah, since Iraq. So I'm like, the biggest and second biggest aircraft carrier in the world are both like in your backyard, and you're talking about you're surprised.
I saw it coming from a mile away.
Yeah,
I'm sure
I
you
saw it
saw
coming. Yeah.
Like when I got the notification that we had started bombing them on Friday night, I was not surprised whatsoever. The fact that they were is just.
Yeah, wait, come on. There's Iran, bro. Hey, IRGC, if you're seeing this, bro, two 18-year-olds saw this coming and you didn't. Come on.
Bro,
Anyway, that's a joke. That's a joke. Don't come for me. That's a joke. But like that was shocking to me. And when we talk about, I also want to touch upon this. I'm at this point, like, again, in separate conversations, I've attributed this to the far left. I'm going to attribute this to the far right as well. I don't know why anybody is praising the Iranian regime or acting like the Ayatollah is a hero. I don't know why anybody's doing that. If you are in this country and you consider yourself an American and think you stand for American values, you have lost the plot if you're really backing the Ayatollah. Because, yeah, I oppose war. I mean, I opposed this war beforehand. Like, before the conflict, yeah, I oppose it. Because, I mean, at this point, I don't, because what can we do? We can't pull out now and just, leave it like nothing happened. But beforehand, I opposed war, but I didn't oppose war because I support Iran. I opposed war because I don't think it was in our national interest. At least with no plan, it wasn't in our national interest. Those aren't the same thing at all. And when we talk about both sides, so when we talk about the far left, I think the reason that anybody can it's misguided from the beginning. The idea that the Ayatollah, the first Ayatollah, Ruhollah Khomeini. It's funny, actually. A lot of people misconceive Ali Khamenei to be the son of Ruhollah Khomeini, but there's an O and an A. That's a fun fact. There's
he did
a
endorse
change.
him, though. He did endorse him.
He endorsed them, but they're not related, or blood related, at least. I think. Don't quote me on that. They're not like father son. But people actually believe that Ruhollah Khomeini was I get it. Yeah, technically he's anti-Zionist, of course. Technically anti-imperialist, I guess, even though he kind of set up an authoritarian country that funds proxies. But and of course, in this country, there's that iconic photo. I don't know their names, but the two leftists that were celebrating the Iranian regime. One of them was executed. The other one was exiled. So it shows that, yeah, they're anti-Zionist. That's not a deal breaker for anybody. Like, Uganda is anti-Zionist. That doesn't make them such a righteous country because they still do inhumane things to their people. And that's what I want to talk about for the left. And I think that's really misguided. You can cut this out if you want. But in our discussions we've had publicly, people that actually believe that Iran would be better with a nuke than Israel. That's a stretch. That's incredibly
Israel has
wrong.
Nukes.
Israel already has one,
They
first of all,
haven't
and
deployed them.
Yeah, I'd just like to say they haven't.
Sponsor of terrorism might just.
Yeah. I mean, I'd expect Iran, the number one global sponsor of state terrorism, to use a nuke before Israel has, because Israel hasn't used it yet. And God willing, they don't. But that's one thing. And then when we talk about the far right as a whole, it's funny. This is probably the biggest intersection of far left and far right we've seen, because they both are kind of
anti-Semitism.
Yeah. It's like on the far right, yeah, we don't want war, but look at where we're at now. You can't go back and you can't take back the missiles. You can't take back the airstrikes. You can't bring Ali Khamenei back to life. it already started. So if you want to say you're America first, what you're hoping for is a quick and efficient victory with a successful objective where we achieve our objective and something works out. Because at this point, going out and saying things like, like especially rooting for Iran, that's nuts in my opinion. But coming out and publicly opposing the United States in the sense, it sounds funny. Yeah, there should be dissent, but hoping we lose or hoping that Iran wins or the regime survives, that isn't America first.
I'm sorry, by the way, hoping that America loses is actively hoping that American troops lose their lives. If you are of that belief, please just leave the goddamn country at that point. You have no purpose in this country. There is no point of you being here. America is not perfect in any sense of the word, but the people who put their lives on the line for this country deserve the utmost respect. And if you are not planning on giving that to them, no matter what the circumstance is, get out of this country. Go live in Iran and face whatever regime they put on you. That's where you deserve to live then. You do not deserve to live in the country with the greatest military and the greatest economy in the world. It's my little ramble.
If you... Of course, there's a difference between blind nationalism and patriotism, but you can disagree with your nation, but hoping it loses or celebrating the deaths of soldiers or anything in that matter is by far the most un-American thing you can do, because our armed forces, it's not even a joke at this point. We're showing the world why we don't have free healthcare in this country. We're literally showing the world why we spend $1 trillion on our military. And at the end of the day, it's America, bro. Airstrikes, Lockheed, and all that's the American dream right there. That's America on a global stage. And you should be rooting for it. However, you can disagree. You can definitely disagree. But hoping we lose, hoping anything like that, that's incredible. And in any way, shape, or form, not refusing to acknowledge that Iran is an enemy to this country is misguided in any sense.
Yeah, and along with that, Iran should never have nuclear weapons. But I want to just go to a bit more of a broad sense here. And when it comes to just the geopolitical workings of the world, if anybody is happy about this right now, it is China, because they are seeing firsthand how the Trump administration acts on impulse when it comes to foreign diplomacy and foreign wars. And if you're China, you have to be coming to the understanding that within the next 3 years is your time to go after Taiwan. And I don't even think I have to explain just how horrible that would be, not only for the people of Taiwan, not only for democracy around the world, but for the economy of the world. It would collapse in a matter of seconds, because Taiwan controls about $10 trillion of global GDP purely based off of their semiconductor industry. The U.S. would drop by about $3 trillion. Our GDP would drop instantly. It would be awful for our country. Economic growth would turn in...
That's not a thing anymore.
Exactly. It would be just so incredibly awful, especially if they put a blockade or just stopped production there. And so if you're China right now and you are seeing the impulse that Trump acts on and this lack of preparation, this lack of actually planning out what an objective is, you got to think that right now is your time to strike. I mean, Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of War. The man is still under accusations of just drinking half the time.
Yep. There's two aspects of that. I mean, of course, they're happy because they see that they can probably pull off humanity's worst but greatest rage bait in Taiwan. But also, if Iran falls, they lose a big source of oil, huge source of oil. And I mean, I don't know if every country values oil like we do. I think they do, but But I think
the fact that they haven't exactly gotten
Also,
they haven't tried anything yet. It says that they really don't care about that. Plus, they're a lot more electric than we are.
But also, if our populace is really going to be anti-war to this extent, I hope people realize that for the sake of this nation, if Taiwan is under attack, we have to throw our full weight at it.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
that little, I know I said it in previous videos, it used to be symbolic for China that the old government that, you know, they think is illegitimate, each one claims they're the real China, blah, blah, blah. For the People's Republic, taking out the Republic would be a big symbolic victory for them. Now, in this stage, they'd secure dominance over the world economically and militaristically. And that's very worrisome for our way of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I would actually love to do a full episode on Taiwan and just the global impact that an invasion could have. Because I don't think enough Americans understand the pure implications that would have on the macro economy, on the global economy. And so that's definitely something we should discuss at a later time. But anyway, coming back to Iran, I guess just rounding out this conversation, because it's been a pretty good conversation overall, I want to get your idea as to what an end goal, what an end should look like here. Because we've already started engaging in this conflict. Likely doesn't end unless, you know, there's some objective that's actually met. So what do you think that is?
Do you want the righteous ending or do you want the American ending?
Give me both.
The righteous ending is that the Iranian people get self-determination and they get a government that they want, which would probably take longer in my opinion. Or, I mean, again, depends on the sense. The American ending is we get a... I have to be careful how I word this. We get a new leader that is there to, I guess, bend to Western will and allow the West to do what they want with Persia.
So a Delcy Rodriguez figure.
Yeah, I guess. And then to finish, and then I guess the cherry on top, you know, Israel gets its hegemony. That's the American ending for the way we are right now, for the way our government has been functioning for the last 20, 30 years or so.
I agree with that, and so I'm not going to repeat what you just said if you were to ask me that question. So I'm going to give you, I guess, the final and most realistic ending to this, which is just a complete overhaul of the way that we currently view the Middle East and, you know, just a complete destabilization of it, and everything goes just awful. Just the Middle East just collapses, just as it always does after U.S. foreign policy forces it to. But most likely, scenario is just that everything goes to hell, just like normal. But anyway, that's going to be it for today's episode. We will be back next week. See you later.